Welcome everyone. I know you use these videos to fall asleep. So before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. And also where you from? And what time are you watching? Now put your headset on and relax. I arrived at the old villa late on a Wednesday afternoon. The place looked like it had been standing for centuries, its walls thick with chipped paint, uneven brickwork showing signs of age. But what caught my attention the most was the stone wall beside the property. It stretched alongside the villa's outer yard, running along the edge of a sprawling field. I was there for research documenting rural architecture for an article. I had no interest in local myths or superstitions. At least, not at first. That changed the moment I spoke with the villa's owner. He was an older man, tall with a stern face and sharp, observant eyes. When I arrived, he greeted me at the entrance and offered me coffee as he showed me around. The interior was just as ancient as the exterior, creaking wooden floors, dimly lit hallways lined with dusty paintings, and the faint scent of old stone and rain-soaked earth. The guest room he assigned me was simple: a bed, a small wooden table, and a single chair in the corner. The window faced that mysterious stone wall. That's when he brought it up. People come here sometimes, searching for something. I frowned. Searching for what? Treasure. I almost laughed. Treasure? He nodded, stirring his coffee. Some believe there's gold buried at the base of that wall. A hidden fortune left behind by those who built it. I scoffed. And has anyone ever found anything? He smirked. No, but that doesn't stop them from trying. His voice dropped slightly, as if choosing his next words carefully. Some say the wall doesn't like being disturbed. I felt an uneasy twinge in my stomach but brushed it off. You mean like a curse? I joked. He shrugged. I don't believe in curses, but I do believe in strange things. At night, I've heard the sounds myself. The scrape of stones, the clink of something metallic tapping against rock. But by morning, there's never any sign that anyone was there. He took a slow sip of coffee. If you're curious, you can keep an eye on it tonight. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, I decided to check the wall up close. I stepped outside, walking across the overgrown grass, and approached it cautiously. The wall stood 7 feet high, made of thick, rough-cut stone blocks stacked perfectly together. Some stones were cracked, small weeds sprouting from their gaps. Others were damp, covered in patches of moss. I ran my fingers over the cold surface. Instantly, a pressure built in my head. A dull, squeezing sensation like an invisible force pressing against my temples. I stepped back. The feeling faded. A coincidence? I took a breath and reached out again, touching a different part of the wall. The pressure returned. Stronger this time. Like something pushing back. I jerked my hand away, heart pounding. What the hell was that? I looked around. The yard was empty. The villa's windows were dark. No movement. No breeze. I shook my head, forcing a chuckle. Maybe I just need some sleep. I turned and walked back inside, shutting the door behind me. But deep down, something felt wrong. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the old house settling. Then a scraping noise. Soft but deliberate. I sat up. My pulse quickened. It came again. The sound of stones shifting. I threw the blanket off, stepped to the window, and peered outside. The night was thick with shadows. A single lamp near the villa's entrance cast a pale glow, barely illuminating the yard. But the wall was darker than the rest of the night. I squinted, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Was there someone standing there? A figure? A shape? The noise stopped. The yard was silent. I swallowed hard and stepped away from the window. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe it was an animal. I climbed back into bed, but sleep did not come easy. The next morning, the first thing I did was check the wall. No loose stones. No dirt out of place. It looked exactly the same. I ran my hand over it again. The pressure returned instantly. A dull, throbbing weight inside my skull. I yanked my hand away, breathing heavily. This wasn't normal. That evening, the villa owner found me in the courtyard. He was sweeping leaves when I asked, "Has anyone else ever mentioned feeling strange when touching the wall?" He stopped mid-sweep, paused, then said, "Some guests have told me the same thing, but I don't stand too close myself. Just in case." He forced a small chuckle and walked off. That night, I decided to watch the wall. I turned off my room's lights and sat near the window. The moon was out, casting faint silver light over the yard. 11 p.m. A scraping sound. It wasn't constant, just short, irregular bursts. I gripped my phone. Something moved. A shadow near the wall. I couldn't be sure, but I thought I saw a figure crouched near the base. Heart pounding. I grabbed my flashlight, slipped on my shoes, and crept downstairs. Outside, the air was damp and cold. The sound stopped. I swept my flashlight along the base of the wall. Nothing. I stepped closer, my breath fogging in the night air. My fingers tingled with anticipation as I reached out, and just as I touched the stone, a deep, crushing pressure filled my head. I gasped, staggering back, clutching my temples. The air around me felt heavy, like something unseen was watching. I turned on my heel and rushed back inside, slamming the door behind me. The next day, I packed my bags. I wasn't staying another night. As I loaded my car, I gave the wall one last glance. Stood there silent, unmoving, but even as I drove away, I could feel it, a distant pressure at the back of my skull. Faint, but there. Like something or someone was still watching. And somehow, I knew it always would be. Story 2. I never expected to bring something back from my vacation that would haunt me. When I returned from my Caribbean cruise, I felt refreshed, sunburned, but happy. I had souvenirs, stories about the tropical beaches, and memories of endless buffets and late-night parties. But none of that matters anymore, because now I wake up at night to whispers. And I know, I'm not imagining them. It all started with a small black doll. I found it at a street market during one of the cruise stops. The vendors sold handmade trinkets, wooden masks, woven bags, carved figurines. Then I noticed him, an old man at a corner table watching me. He had deep wrinkles and eyes that felt like they could see right through me. I didn't know why, but I walked toward him. He smiled, not a welcoming smile, more like something knowing. Sitting on his table was a doll stitched together from black fabric scraps. It was crude, uneven, its limbs thin and oddly long. Strange symbols were embroidered into the cloth, running across its torso like forgotten writing. I picked it up. It felt wrong in my hands. Rough, cold despite the heat of the afternoon. "What is it?" I asked. The old man's smile faded. "A guardian," he said simply. "Guardian of what?" He didn't answer. Instead, he named a price cheaper than I expected and handed it to me carefully like he was glad to be rid of it. I slipped the doll into my bag, shrugged off the unease curling in my stomach, and walked away. I never should have taken it. Back home, I set the doll on a living room shelf. It sat there, slumped against a stack of DVDs. I didn't think much about it. Just a souvenir. A harmless trinket. That night, I fell into bed, exhausted from the long flight. I slept deeply, until I woke up. Something had stirred me. Something so faint that, at first, I wasn't sure I'd heard anything at all. A whisper, soft, faint, drawn out. I held my breath, listening. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't my imagination. It was a voice, low, rhythmic, repeating short phrases in a language I didn't recognize. A slow, chilling murmur drifting from the living room. I sat up, my skin crawling. The sound faded. I forced myself to move. I grabbed my flashlight, crept toward the living room, and swept the beam across the room. Nothing. Everything was exactly as I had left it, except the doll had fallen forward, face down. I hesitated, my pulse racing. Had it just slipped? I reached out, picked it up, and placed it back upright. Told myself it was nothing. But as I turned to go back to bed, I thought I heard something. A whisper. Close. Right behind me. I spun around. Nothing. Over the next few nights, the whispering continued. Always around 3 a.m. Always just on the edge of my hearing, like someone speaking from behind a closed door. I tried to record it. Set my phone on the coffee table, hit record, and waited. The whispers came. I let the recording run until the sun rose. When I played it back, Nothing. Dead silence. Like the sound didn't exist beyond my own ears. That was the night I decided to get rid of the doll. I took it to the storage closet in my laundry room, placed it in a shoebox, sealed the lid with packing tape, and shoved it onto the top shelf. For the first time in days, I felt relief. That night, I slept with my bedroom door locked. But at 3 a.m., I woke up. The whispering had returned. Only this time, it was muffled, like it was coming from behind a wall. I shot up in bed, my breath shallow. The closet. It was coming from inside the closet. My skin prickled as I forced myself out of bed, heart hammering. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and stepped toward the laundry room. The door was still shut. The chair I had jammed against the handle was still there. Yet the whispers, they were inside. I swallowed the lump in my throat, yanked the chair away, and threw open the door. The closet was dark, silent. The shoebox sat on the floor. The lid was still taped shut, but the whispering had stopped. I knelt down, hands shaking, peeled the tape away, and slowly lifted the lid. The doll was exactly where I had left it, but the air in the closet felt thick, suffocating, like something was still in there with me. I slammed the lid shut, shoved the box back onto the shelf, and backed away. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I got rid of it for good. I drove to a thrift store on the other side of town, took the shoebox, placed it in the donation bin, and walked away without looking back. That night, for the first time in a week, there were no whispers. I felt free, but the peace didn't last. 3 nights later, I came home late from work. I stepped inside, flicked on the living room light, and my stomach dropped. The doll was sitting on my coffee table, right in the center. No shoebox, no explanation. Its stitched eyes seemed to watch me, waiting. I lost it, grabbed the doll, stuffed it into a trash bag, and drove out of town. I pulled into an abandoned lot, threw the bag into a dumpster, and sped home without looking back. I barely slept that night. Every creak in the house made my skin crawl. Every shadow felt like it was watching. But the next morning, the doll was gone. Maybe it was over. Maybe I had finally escaped it. It's been 3 weeks now, and so far, no whispers. But sometimes, late at night, I wake up expecting to hear them. I lie there, ears straining against the silence, waiting, dreading the moment I'll hear that low, rhythmic murmur once again. Because deep down, I know it's not really over. Not yet. And if the whispers ever return, I don't think I'll be able to get rid of it again.
Story 3. I never liked clowns. Something about them always made me uneasy, the way they smiled just a little too wide, their frozen grins stretching across painted faces. My grandfather, however, loved them. His house was filled with clown figurines, paintings, and puppets. Some were porcelain, others were wooden, and a few were made of cloth, stitched together with care but aged by time. When he passed away, most of his collection was sold or given away. But for some reason, I kept one, a cloth clown. It wasn't anything special, just an old, faded doll with chipped paint on its fabric face. Its wide, stitched grin had started to fray, and one of its arms hung looser than the other. It wore a striped outfit, red and white, though the colors had dulled with age. The worst part? The button eyes. They weren't cartoonish or exaggerated. They were small, black, and simple, yet somehow they always seemed to be watching. I told myself I was keeping it as a reminder of my grandfather. I should have never brought it home. I placed the clown on a shelf in my living room near a row of old books. It sat there, slumped slightly to one side, its head tilted forward as if it were listening. For the first few days, I barely noticed it. Then the dreams started. At first, they were vague flashes of red and white, a strange echoing giggle, and the feeling of something lurking just beyond my vision. I would wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding, unable to remember what had scared me. By the end of the week, the dreams became clearer. I would find myself standing in a dimly lit room, surrounded by laughter that didn't belong to me. In the corner, the cloth clown sat on a chair, its head slowly turning toward me, its button eyes gleaming in the darkness. I would wake up gasping for air. Then things in my house started moving. Little things at first, a book out of place, a picture frame tilted slightly. I convinced myself I had bumped into them, that I was just being careless. Until one night, I walked past the shelf and froze. The clown was not where I left it. It was sitting closer to the edge, its head lifted higher than before, its button eyes staring directly at me. A deep chill spread through my body. I swallowed hard. Maybe it just fell forward. I reached out, hesitated, and gently pushed it back into place. As I turned to walk away, a giggle. Faint. Right behind me. I spun around so fast I nearly tripped. But the clown hadn't moved. The room was silent. The air felt thick, like something unseen was watching me, waiting. I backed away slowly. That night, I barely slept. The next morning, I made a decision. I grabbed the clown off the shelf and stuffed it into a box. "You're going to storage," I muttered, trying to ignore the unease crawling up my spine. I carried the box to the closet, shoved it onto the highest shelf, and slammed the door shut. Out of sight. Out of mind. I exhaled, shaking off the tension. For the rest of the day, the house felt lighter. That night, I went to bed early, feeling relieved. Until 3 a.m. A soft thud. I opened my eyes, heart already racing. Silence. Then another thud. From the closet. I sat up slowly. The room was dark, but something felt wrong. I reached for my phone, turned on the flashlight, and aimed it toward the closet door. I couldn't move. The door was open. Wide open. The box I had shoved onto the top shelf was now on the floor, tipped over. The clown was sitting upright, just a few feet outside the closet, its button eyes locked onto mine. My body refused to move. A sharp, high-pitched giggle filled the room. This time, I wasn't dreaming. I don't remember jumping out of bed, but suddenly I was grabbing the clown, my fingers digging into the rough fabric. I ran to the back door, threw it open, and bolted into the yard. The wind howled around me as I reached the fire pit. Without hesitation, I threw the clown inside. My hands shook as I fumbled with a match. The moment the flames touched the fabric, the laughter stopped. A sickening hiss filled the air, followed by a thick, black smoke that curled unnaturally upward. I stood there, watching the flames consume the doll, its button eyes melting into nothing. I waited until nothing but ashes remained. Then and only then did I turn and walk back inside. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept without dreams. No laughter. No whispers. Nothing. The next morning, I swept the ashes away and never spoke about it again. Somewhere deep inside, I know I made a mistake bringing it home. But sometimes when the house is too quiet, I swear I can still hear a faint, distant giggle. Waiting. Watching. Listening. And I pray that it never finds its way back. I never expected a simple online auction to turn my life into a nightmare. At first, it was just another vintage item, a porcelain doll from the 1950s listed on an obscure collectibles site. I'd won antiques before, old clocks, faded paintings, little trinkets with history. But this doll, this one was different. Her glass eyes were a deep, dark brown, almost too realistic. Her synthetic curls were styled into perfect ringlets, though some strands were slightly frayed. She wore a faded blue dress with lace-trimmed cuffs, and the delicate stitching on her porcelain face had small, nearly invisible cracks. When I placed my bid, I didn't think much of it. I won easily. The seller messaged me soon after. "I'm glad she's going to a new home. It's better that way." I typed a quick reply. "What do you mean?" They never answered. That should have been my first warning. The package arrived 3 days later. The box was old, slightly dented, as if it had been passed through many hands before reaching mine. Inside, the doll was wrapped in layers of newspaper and brittle, yellowed tissue paper. The moment I touched her, I felt it, a strange heaviness. Not in weight, but in something else. The porcelain was smooth, cold. The glass eyes, almost too lifelike. I shook off the unease and set the doll on a shelf in my spare bedroom, with my other collectibles. For the first few nights, nothing happened. Then, on the fourth night, I woke up. A soft sound echoed from down the hall. Tap, then another, like tiny fingers drumming against wood. I sat up, heart pounding. The house was silent. Maybe it was just the old pipes, or the wind outside. I took a deep breath, forced myself to lie back down, and closed my eyes. Just as sleep was about to take me. Tap, 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 closer. I bolted upright. The noise was coming from the spare room, the room where I had left the doll. I swallowed hard, reached for my phone, and turned on the flashlight. The dim glow barely lit the hallway as I crept forward, my bare feet silent against the wooden floor. I reached the door. It was slightly open. I was sure I had closed it. The air inside felt stale. Cold. I stepped inside and aimed my light at the shelf. The doll was facing me. I was certain I had placed it facing the wall. A sharp chill crawled up my spine. I wasn't superstitious. But this was wrong. I reached out, hesitated, then turned the doll back toward the wall. I left the room, shut the door tightly, and went back to bed. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I convinced myself I had misremembered. That evening, I checked again before bed. The doll was still facing the wall. I exhaled, relieved. Maybe I had been imagining things. But that night, at exactly 3:14 a.m., I heard the tapping again. Tap, tap, tap. I held my breath. Then, a slow, drawn-out creak. The sound of a door opening. I reached for my phone with shaking hands, turned on the flashlight, and pointed it toward my bedroom door. It was open. My stomach dropped. I forced myself to move, stepping into the hallway. The door to the spare room was wide open. Inside, the shelf was empty. The doll was gone. I turned, scanning the hallway, and froze. She was sitting on the floor, right outside my bedroom door, facing me, waiting. I packed the doll into a box that morning, wrapped it in layers of tape. I carried it straight outside and tossed it into the garbage bin. I slammed the lid shut, wiped my hands on my jeans, and walked back inside, feeling a wave of relief. By nightfall, it would be gone, or so I thought. The next morning, I stepped outside to grab the mail, and there, leaning against my front door, was the box. The same tape, the same packing, only the lid was slightly open. A piece of old newspaper stuck out. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't want to look, but I had to. With shaking hands, I peeled the lid back. She was inside, sitting exactly as I had left her. I slammed the box shut and carried it to my car. I wasn't taking any chances. I drove 20 miles out of town to a thrift store donation bin. I tossed the box inside, turned, and drove away without looking back. This time, I told myself it was over. That night, for the first time in days, I slept soundly. No tapping, no whispers, no strange movements. I felt safe. Until the next morning. I woke up, stretched, and stepped into the hallway, and there she was, sitting on my kitchen table, her glass eyes gleaming in the morning light, waiting, watching, back where she wanted to be. I don't know what to do. I can't throw her away. I can't give her away. She always comes back. And tonight, as I lie in bed, staring at my locked bedroom door, I can hear it again. The soft, rhythmic tap, 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 closer. I squeeze my eyes shut, trying to ignore it. But I know she's waiting, and this time, I don't think she's going to stay still for much longer. Don't forget to tell your horror experience in comment. Subscribe our channels for more scary and horror stories.